Okay, good afternoon. My name is Megan Brady, and this will be my presentation on human sexual development. And I just wanted to give a little bit of background about myself before I began. I'm a juvenile probation officer, so a lot of this has to do with adolescence and the way that certain things in their environment impacts their overall sexual development throughout their life. And I specifically chose that population to kind of focus on because, like I said, I'm a juvenile probation officer, so it kind of benefited me both professionally and academically. Um, so, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to examine some of the research that I did and how that research pertains to human sexual development and how that impacts individual personalities within society. I'm also going to discuss how human sexual development impacts interpersonal relationships as well as clinical practice. And then I'm going to review multiple resources that support the correlation between human sexual development, character development, and the maintenance and the formulation of interpersonal skills. So, to begin, let's get into what is human sexual development. Well, that has a lot of different meanings to different people, but the textbook definition is that human sexual development focuses on sexual enhancement through intimacy, sexual expression, and pleasure. And like I said, each person has their own idea as to what that means. And your own personal human sexual development is definitely personal to you, your upbringing, and your experiences. Like I was saying before, individual personalities. How are they formed? I mean, your personality is definitely formed. Of course, there's genetics involved with it, but it definitely has to do with your upbringing and your environment in which you grow up in. Um, for me personally, what contributed to my individual personality was the fact that I was raised in a single family home. We were raised, by my mom. She was not only a single parent, but she was also a teen parent. She had all of us before the age of 25. So, me being the oldest and, her having me when she was 16, it kind of forced me to be independent. She was working full time to, support her children and keep a roof over our head. So it really forced me to kind of, grow up before it was my time. But it also established things within me, such as, independence and strength and, the ability to stand on my own 2 feet and to, take care of things. That's, one example of how my individual personality was developed. And I'm sure each and every one of you, if you, took the time to really, dig deep and find different things within your personality, you can probably, find the correlation between who you are and, where you come from. So, my next topic is there a correlation between sexual development and an individual's personality? Yes, of course. Sexual development and desire is a module within someone's personality. There's so many different things that, make us who we are. And I definitely think that sexual development is, right in there with our personalities. So, yeah, there is an absolute correlation between sexual development and an individual's personality. Um, like our personalities, sexuality is formed through various situations and experiences, in our life. It could be a number of things. It could be our religion. It could be the way that the media and how much time we've spent either watching TV or involved with technology in our adolescence. It can be the way our parents brought us up. Was sex discussed openly and honestly within the home, or was it viewed in a way that was uncomfortable? All of those things, all of those experiences and those situations, they all impact not only our personality but our sexual development as well. Um, Sexual personality begins in adolescence and continues through teenage years and adulthood. So everybody knows that majority of our personality, our morals, our values, our ability to decipher right and wrong, that begins in the beginning stages of life. Some can say it's as early as infancy. So adolescence is crucial for shaping and developing who we're going to be later on in life. Sexual personality, is no exception. What we are taught when we are younger is likely to continue with us, you know, throughout our teenage years and into adulthood. Teenage years specifically, when our hormones start to ramp up and sexual desire continues to increase, um, we're going to rely on and we're going to fall back on what we were taught in our adolescent years. So, our sexual personality continues to evolve and it continues to grow based off our various situations and experiences. So you're going to see that I did a lot of research to support my theory that there is a direct correlation between personality and sexual development. So as we go through, I will pause and I will explain and present the various studies that I did. So for this one, research study number one, this was a direct research study on the correlation between personality and sexual development. So what these two researchers did is they took two sections. So they took volunteers and non-volunteers. And they did that because they believed that in order to develop unbiased results, sexuality did not need to be mentioned to the non-volunteers. So that's what separates the two sections. The volunteers they were aware that the study that they were participating in was specific to sexual development. The non-volunteers, they were informed that the study was just being conducted to review personality. So that was the difference between the two sections. And they did this, and it was a mix of both questions, but they did this to, like I said, to develop unbiased results. Surprisingly, out of the 1,200 participants, there were no differences amongst sexual behaviors of the non-volunteers and the volunteers. So everybody was sexually active. They had very similar experiences in their sexual, encounters. But what made it different was there was a relationship between personality elements and the sexual tendencies of the two groups. So all of the participants had sexual experiences, but what made them different was their sexual tendencies, meaning their sexual preferences, their sexual history, their sexual, things of that nature. The volunteers proved in their own, this is, their personality. So the volunteers, they were not sexually fearful. They masturbated frequently. They felt less guilt, and they tended to be older than that of non-volunteers. So that, proves my other theory that our sexual personality is continuously developing. So whereas these volunteers, maybe when they were in adolescence and their teenage years, maybe they weren't as comfortable discussing sex. Maybe they didn't masturbate frequently. Maybe they did feel guilty. But what this study proved was that the ones that were more comfortable in their behaviors was, the older population. It also proved that volunteers were introduced to erotica at an early age. So, like I said, adolescence, it really does develop who you're going to be and what type of sexual desire you're going to have later in life. So because these volunteers were introduced to erotica at an early age, they were comfortable in their sexual development, and they were, comfortable to discuss this in a study. The volunteers had a larger amount of sexual partners than that of the non-volunteers. So this side, they were more sexually active, meaning that they, not the amount of times that they had sex, but with the amount of people that they had sexual intercourse with. So another research that I got into was perfectionism, and perfectionism perfectionism is very personal to me because I like to think that I suffer from perfectionism. It's a it's a model of dyadic perfectionism, meaning that everything must be obviously perfect. Well, what most people don't know is that researchers discuss um, multi-dimensional sexual perfectionism. And with that, it's not only a personality trait where you feel like you have to perform and live your life to a certain expectation. Then we take that individual personality trait and we move that into our sexual lives, and it becomes an entirely separate thing. So this study, what they did was they employed a multidimensional sexual perfectionism questionnaire. Blah, what a mouthful. And what it does is it engages 4 forms of sexual perfectionism. That includes self-oriented, partner-oriented, partner-prescribed, and socially prescribed. Um, so self-oriented means, the expectations that you applied to yourself. So that can be, both professionally, personally, sexually. It's just the expectations that an individual puts on themselves. Um, this can include, an unrealistic goal and what it means to be an ideal sexual partner, based specifically off of his or her opinion. Another aspect of the partner-oriented sexual perfectionism is that dyadic perfectionism places an unrealistic expectation on partners. So that's what the partner-oriented part of this questionnaire it focused on specifically. Partner prescribed theory. This was what they felt that they needed from a partner, meaning they had very, very, very specific criteria as to what the perfect partner was. So whereas partner oriented, it focused on how they perform. This one, partner prescribed, focuses on who that partner is and what makes them perfect, I guess you could say. And then socially prescribed sexual beliefs. This is, based on sexual standards that he or she perceives to be promoted by society. And we all know that sexual, performance levels and beliefs are thoroughly, thoroughly forced through society and through the media and through, various different things. So this questionnaire kind of wanted to take, multiple aspects, put it together and try to figure out, the comparison of the beliefs and the standards of people who were suffering from dyadic perfectionism versus people, who had very standard sexual beliefs. So what he did was he studied college students in 4 different areas. He looked at their sexual awareness, their sexual monitoring, meaning what concerns they had with how others viewed them sexually. Their sexual appeal consciousness. They wanted to see if, college students were concerned with, do others see me as sexy? And then sexual assertiveness. Are they independent and are they self-reliant in their sexual, tasks? So males and females were examined separately in this study. And what they realized is that the self-oriented ones had similarities with sexual monitoring in both men and women. So both men and women were very hard on themselves on how others viewed them sexually. So they went out of their way to look a certain way and to act a certain way to really promote their sexuality. And the other 3 areas, the sexual awareness, appeal consciousness, and the assertiveness, only showed positive correlations in females. Now, females, there's kind of an unrealistic expectation of how females are supposed to be in regards to sexuality. So I can definitely see where, the positive correlations were definitely seen in perfectionism. And then, of course, these three areas. So perfectionism is definitely a portion of personality. And if that's a part of your personality, it's obviously going to impact the way that you perform sexually. So it affects an individual's ability to formulate and to, maintain relationships and a healthy sexual, life. Now, I've mentioned quite a few times, because I'm a firm believer that the media shapes a lot of things. Aside from sexual development, the media, it shapes in a lot of ways that we think. They present something and it automatically becomes truthful to the viewers, whether it's based on fact or fiction. The media, it's a force. So, of course, it's going to impact, sexual development. So, according to our textbook, the average adolescent spends 100 hours per month viewing online videos or watching television. Technology, social media, everything like that, it's only going to continue, to increase. That is inevitable. And our kids, as we move towards a more technological, reliant society, those numbers are going to increase. And our kids are going to be even more predisposed to the information that the media is releasing. And, teenagers form sexual personality to include behavior and beliefs based on the messages that are delivered, in the media. But the sexual references in television programs and music and online videos is lacking an educational basis. And it can be highly misleading to youth. It encourages casual sexual intercourse. And you rarely hear, for instance, rap music talk about love and sex in the same context. They hardly ever discuss love, and instead they discuss, sex with multiple different partners. The media content being viewed in the United States, it does not represent the realities of everyday society, meaning love, a man and a woman, a marriage, one partner for a long period of time, and what that means to maintain a healthy sexual relationship. Instead, it encourages, promiscuous behavior. It puts an unrealistic expectation on sexual performance and a huge emphasis on unequal gender roles. And what I mean by that is the way that women are perceived in the media and the way that men, are perceived in the media. There's a disconnect. And what our youth and, society in general, what they don't understand is, that it's a team. It really is an effort to, have a healthy sexual relationship with somebody. Now, I'm going to take you guys to YouTube, because I want to show you what I mean by the way that the media presents women. And they do it to men as well, but the example that I found is excellent in regards to how they present females. So I'm going to pull this up. This is a Carl's Jr. commercial. Now, this is as simple as a hamburger, and I want you guys to watch how they over-sexualize something as simple as, a hamburger. I got a fever and inflammation, that's what I got. You turn the heat on me, so I'm like that. I've been injured, going up the station, I am on the spot.
Southwest patty melt with jalapenos, pepper jack cheese, and spicy Santa Fe sauce.
Love burns you up the most, like it or
The process just got a whole lot hotter.
Baby,
the Southwest Patty Melt. New at Carl's Jr. and Hardee's.
So, why? That's my question. Why? Like, it's a hamburger. And I don't know about you guys, but when I'm eating a hamburger, I don't look anything like that. I probably have like grease dripping down my shirt and probably some ketchup on my, on my chin. I don't know. I don't look like that. And, when our kids see that, it automatically makes them think a certain way about women, the way the women are supposed to look and the way that their sexual appeal is supposed to come off. Like, it makes them feel, or it encourages them to think that even a woman who's eating a hamburger has to continue to be sexy. And that is going to impact a youth's way of viewing sex and their way of viewing, women. So, as we saw in the commercial, women are portrayed by the media as highly sexual creatures, when in all reality, I'm not going to say we aren't, but I think our sexual preferences come more from an emotional standpoint. Most of the time, our sexual encounters come from, an emotional connection with someone or feelings that we may have. So to be portrayed as highly sexual creatures, you're presenting it to the point where, anybody who wants to have sex with a woman should be allowed to, because we're highly sexual. And like we just saw, it's an unrealistic idea of how a sexually desirable woman looks. So, what that commercial, and I'll just keep referencing that, presented was that in order for me to be able to enjoy, a hamburger, I have to be, over sexualizing it. Does that mean that my husband cannot find me, attractive if I, have my hair in a mess and I want to go eat a hamburger in my jeans and my, Florida hoodie? No. And that's an unrealistic idea of what it means to be sexually desirable. We should be, educating people on the importance of an, relationship connection. And that's what, sexual desire should come from. We just saw, tight clothing. Women are expected to have things that hug their body and show their figure. They're, encouraged to wear excessive makeup. Natural is not often encouraged. I don't know if you guys have recently seen, Alicia Keys. She's refusing to wear makeup, and the backlash that she has received is just unbelievable. But she's gorgeous. Does that mean that to be, successful in this field, in her profession, that she has to wear excessive makeup to show her raw talent of being able to sing? No. And we're presented with a promiscuous persona. You just saw it. Kate Upton was paid money to advertise a Carl's Jr. patty melt, but in order to do so, she had to do it in a promiscuous way. Because in all reality, in our society, sex sells. And then, men are portrayed as womanizers. And what I mean by that is, movies, rap songs, anything like that. Men have either multiple sexual partners, or they refrain from commitment, meaning because they have multiple sexual partners, they're either in a relationship and potentially cheating, or they are afraid of commitment. And I'm not saying that this is true or false. I'm just saying that this is the way that the media often presents men. So it really, could you see how that would shape the way that our young, men think about women? So they think that women are supposed to be highly sexual creatures, and they get an unrealistic idea of how a sexually desirable woman looks. But then they're furthermore encouraged to refrain from commitment and to have multiple sexual partners. I mean, the media absolutely encourages casual sex. But casual sex, what people don't realize, increases the likelihood of risky sexual behavior. And what I mean by risky, sexual behavior is as follows. My apologies. They have casual sexual experiences with multiple partners. I mean, the implications of sleeping with multiple people, it's endless. STDs, unwanted pregnancies, a million things. Because you know what? These risky sexual behaviors, they don't take precautions. They don't utilize contraceptive. In the movies, you see that spur of the moment where the man and the woman, they just hook up, and you don't ever see them taking the proper precautions to, to prevent pregnancies or to prevent, sexually transmitted disease. So there's a lack of awareness about STDs. I mean, our society, has a negative outlook, and they really kind of shy away from discussing things as serious as AIDS, HIVs, Hep C, things like that. I understand it's not, a topic that is so easily discussed. However, it's one that needs to be discussed in regards to developing sexual, behaviors in our youth. It's so important that it's discussed about. Education, is the key to everything. And then specifically, college students and high school students are participating in sexual intercourse after alcohol consumption. Now, there's a million implications that could come with that. Specifically, what comes to mind for me is, if you're intoxicated, a guy or a girl cannot consent to, consensual sex. So potentially, we're putting ourselves in a situation where rape charges could be brought against us if we're participating in sexual intercourse after alcohol consumption. And I don't mean your husband, your wife, you come home. I'm not talking about that, even though, those can have implications as well. What I'm talking about is, like I said, the high school and the college students who are going to these, parties, and then they're having sex without taking precautions, and things like, I don't know, legal implications or unwanted pregnancies. Teen pregnancies are a huge problem. And then sexually transmitted diseases. Like, these are all considered risky sexual behaviors that are encouraged by the media. And if we as parents are not sitting down and we're not talking to our children about, the implications of participating in risky sexual behavior, we are shaping their sexual development. We as adults, we are supposed to be forming not only their personalities and their morals, but what they think about sex. So, study number 3, risky sexual behavior and genetics. So, what these researchers did is they analyzed data of non-identical twins and identical twins to attempt to establish a possible correlation between personality and sexual risky behavior. So that's what the purpose of the study was. They formulated a questionnaire that touched on various topics, such as methods of birth control, history of venereal diseases, concurrent sexual encounters, and partaking in sexual intercourse after alcohol consumption. So 22% of the participants were able to find a correlation between risky sexual behavior and hereditability. And what I mean by that is, it was related to their genetics, what they inherited from those who came before them. 29%, however, were related to shared environment. And what I mean by that is parenting, their parenting styles, their strategies, socioeconomic class, and their peer groups. Kids talk. Peer groups influence not only sexual behavior, but alcohol and drug use, delinquent behavior. Peer groups, our peers, the ones that our children surround themselves with, they have a huge influence, but we also do as well. We are with our kids, and we have the opportunity to teach them the risks of risky sexual behavior. We have that opportunity. So this study proved that risky behavior was, 29% could be found to be related to shared environment. 38% was attributed to the unshared environment. So what that means is, if their personalities, meaning that they had traits of impulsiveness, extroversion, psychotism, neurotism were also found in that, and with that, those are obvious genetic factors of sexually risky behavior. Um, Impulsiveness, that is a given. That comes along with anything that's risky. It doesn't impulsiveness. They don't give much thought to what they're doing and what the outcome could potentially be. Adolescents feel that they're invincible. So risky sexual behavior is definitely going to be something that's going to be prevalent in that population. Um, I actually discussed religion a lot in my book report because I thought Dr. Rosnial's book, A Celebration of Sex, was incredible. It really took you out of the box and showed you the way that, Christianity viewed sex. Um, Way back when, Christianity viewed sex as both sinful and dangerous. Um, the restrictions that it placed on Christians came from historians, and they formulated those feelings and beliefs based on their own sexual insecurities, their struggles, and their fears. So the the view that it was sinful and dangerous did not actually come from any factual or biblical information. It actually was placed purely off of those individuals, struggles in their own sexual development and sexual life. Sexual intercourse in some religions is viewed specific to reproducing. A celebration of sex, try to break that stereotype. It tries to encourage, intimacy and sexual exploration and things of that nature. Like I said, it restricts the idea that sex is intended to be pleasurable, and I think I kind of always got the same idea in regards to religion. And then I read, A Celebration of Sex, and it like totally debunked any stereotype that I had about religious groups and sexual behaviors, because Dr. Rasnial, he really went into detail about how sex is intended to be pleasurable and how you can reach those maximum levels of intimacy and pleasure. So if you're being brought up in a religious home that devalues sexual pleasure, that is going to indefinitely, I'm not going to say indefinitely, but it's going to have a huge impact on how you view sex. If you're in a home that believes that sexual intercourse is only for a means of reproducing and that pleasure is not supposed to be had within sexual intercourse, that is going to impact not only your personality, but it's going to impact your sexual development as well. So how does sexual development impact interpersonal relationships? Well, interpersonal relationships are interactions that occur between people who satisfy one another's explicit or implicit physical or emotional needs. Now, that can be your family members, that can be your coworkers, and it can be friendships. Interpersonal relationships with your family members, they satisfy, your emotional needs. They're your family members. You love them. Coworkers, you're a team. You have, one mission, so you're working together. And your friendships, they're definitely emotional needs, and they could be physical needs as well. You can always call a friend. But what is most important to this presentation is sexual development and the correlation between sexual and romantic interpersonal relationships. I kind of got into it a little bit ago about sexually delinquent behavior, but this study that I'm going to introduce, it acknowledges that there is an association between adolescent sexual activity and sexually delinquent behavior. So this study is actually based off of the government's federal sex education policy, and that policy states that sexual activity outside the context of marriage are likely to have harmful and psychological and physical effects. And those effects can include poor academic achievement and low self-esteem. Um, Rejection significantly impacts your individual personality. And speaking from, an adolescent girl's perspective, should she engage in intercourse with somebody who is not a boyfriend or anything like that, or just engage in it whatsoever, and then she experiences rejection from that individual, that is going to hinder her. That is going to harm her personality, that is going to harm her esteem, and that's going to, reflect in multiple different areas to include, poor academic achievement. They studied two factors that contributed to the relationship module of adolescent sexual behavior and delinquent behavior in adolescence. The first control that focused on relationship diversity and context, in which the delinquent behavior takes place. The second control, it focused on the underlying genetic factors that can influence sexual activity and delinquency. And what they found was that 80% of 18-year-olds reported that they had an involvement in a romantic partnership, and that the average time span of that relationship occurred over a 12-month period. And although the research reveals that, most teenagers are partaking in sexual activity within a romantic relationship, they've also had, sex with those who they're not romantically, involved with. Those can include, non-romantic relationships such as past romantic partners, friends, and or acquaintances. And what I think they're calling them nowadays is hooking up. So that means that there is no relationship, there is no emotional, it is just simply for, the means of having sex. And the implications of that are, there's been proven factual information that it causes, depression. If it doesn't work out, or say you do quote unquote hook up at a party and people spread rumors, bullying is a force within our schools. Cyberbullying is on the rise, and it's extreme, and it's causing high suicide rates in, adolescents and teenagers. So participating in sexually delinquent behavior, it can cause, a decline in healthy, emotional development. And if that stalls, our kids are going to be depressed. 20% of these youth who admitted in the study that they were having sexual activity outside of a non-romantic relationship also concluded that there was a 20% increase in misconduct, and that there was a 31% growth in substance abuse. So sexually delinquent behavior can come with implications such as depression, misconduct, poor academic achievement, and substance abuse, and I'm sure a bunch of other things. This study on sexual offenders is very specific to me and my profession. One of the things that I struggled with significantly coming into this was, how many sexual offenders we had on our caseload. I just did not realize, when you think of a sexual offender, you always hear about them when they're at a later stage in their life, but you don't really encounter them at the first time that they encounter law enforcement for, participating in sexual misconduct. So for me, it was a little bit overwhelming. So this study particularly was important. It was conducted by the Journal of Sexual Research, and they did the study on, a sexual offender's perceptions of their interpersonal relationships. The three areas related to the sexual, they also did 3 areas related to a sexual offender's intimate relationships and their early attachment experiences, which we know is huge. The first area was an investigation into a sexual offender's adult romantic relationships, how that influenced their attachment styles in their interpersonal relationships, and their deficits in intimacy, and of course the offending behavior, what brought them to the status of being considered a sexual offender. The second area examined that offender's early development experiences, like I cannot say it enough that who we become both individually and sexually, it starts early. And the second area distinguished predictable variables for later sexual aggression. And the third area examined the offender's adolescent interactions with caregivers and peers and how that relates to the attachment theory. And the attachment theory identifies an individual's interpersonal strategies that are established through his or her experiences with others, to include family members and, outside of the home. What they established was there was a decent but dependent maternal relationship with child molesters. And why I'm going to specify the different levels of sexual offenders is because it's a large umbrella and multiple different things fall under it. It can be as extreme as you see child molesters and rapists, and as small as somebody who is participating in voyeurism. So that umbrella is large, so I'm going to be specific in what area relates to what type of offender. For the rapist, there was a negativity between the mother and son. So you can see a huge difference right there in between the difference between child molesters and rapists. So rapists, they felt negatively about their mothers. So maybe perhaps because of that relationship, they felt the need to overpower other women and to have control. Therefore, encouraging and developing that sexual misconduct to be a rapist, to violate an individual. And at child molesters, they were dependent maternal relationships. Now, I can't find any correlation between that, to be completely honest with you, but that's what the study revealed. And then the role of the father, I think, is important to consider. However, the role of the father was concluded to be insignificant within the sexual offender population, either because of lack of involvement or he just wasn't present. So what really, really shapes the sexual offender's interpersonal relationships is the maternal figure in the relationship. And if there was a male caregiver relationship, it was often reported that it was both hostile and distant. So that, obviously supports the insignificance with the paternal role in the development of a sexual offender. And then, of course, from adolescence, they had sexually aggressive inclinations. So those were noted very early in life. Juvenile sexual offenders identified a pattern of parental loss. Now, that can be from death or divorce, or just the fact that one parent was not present in the home. And then they also reported that there were challenges within the family matrix and interpersonal relationships, meaning the family was not close, there was violence, or there was just an extreme disconnect. And like I said, most sexual offenders have a history of physical abuse and family sexual abuse. I think that has a huge implication on how somebody is going to turn out. Violence breeds more violence. So my final topic is how, sexual development is going to impact clinical practice. We can often expect to see, cases of couple satisfaction. Come in, a married couple comes in, either the wife is not, comfortable with something that's going on in their sex life, or the husband is, upset with something that's going on. Even more so, as legislative continues to support the LGBTQ community, clinical practice is going to be expected to address sexual orientation issues, meaning those who want to discuss their sexuality and maybe disconnects within their family, or how it's impacting their interpersonal relationships. Sexual dysfunction is also something that is expected to be seen in clinical practice, because it is a common problem within our society. So it's inevitable that at some point in our time as professionals, we will encounter sexual dysfunction issues. And then a conflict within self. Like I talked about when I discussed the didactic perfectionism, Insecurity is crucial, and it has a tremendous impact on our personalities and our sexual personalities. So conflict within self is going to be something that we're going to see professionally. And infertility. With marriage counseling, this could be a huge divide within a marriage. It could be the making or the breaking point, or it could be a point of a wife or a husband feeling extremely depressed or feeling, a loss. And then sexually transmitted diseases. There are multiple implications when a individual finds out that they have HIV and AIDS. High suicide rates, increased depression, and an extreme use of substance abuse are often reported with that population. So clinical practice, it's going to be a crucial need for those who come in with sexually transmitted diseases. So sexual dysfunction. 1,749 women have reported having sexual dysfunction, and often the ages of that are 18 to 59. So that's a wide range. So we can expect to see, a multitude of different women experiencing sexual dysfunction. Same age for the men, but less surprisingly, which was a shock to me. I definitely thought the statistics were flipped, but 1,410 men report sexual dysfunction. There can be health-related matters and psychosocial factors that impact sexual dysfunction. Health-related matters, it can be a number of things that are impacting, a man or a woman's ability to perform. But it could also be psychosocial. It could be a loss of a job. It can be an insecurity. It could be, a sudden change. It could be a flaw within, that person's individual personality. It really depends. And sexual desire disorder is the number one reported sexual dysfunction. And what I mean by sexual desire disorder is you lack the want and the need to participate in sex. And we can actually see this quite often in marriages. So clinical practice will be impacted by sexual desire disorder. And it impacts 1/2 of married couples. So, like I said, it's going to be inevitable. Sexual aversion disorder, aversion of any partnered sexual activity, meaning that he or she is unable to reach sexual satisfaction with a partner or with, engaging in partner sexual activity. Male hypoactive sexual desire disorder, it means a low or absent sexual desire, as I discussed earlier with the sexual desire disorder. This one's specific to men. And female orgasmic disorder, which is a difficulty or reduced orgasmic sensation. This can be frustrating for both the man and the woman, and it can cause some serious disconnect between a husband and a wife. And dyspareunia, sorry if I mispronounced that, but painful intercourse. It's hard for, if you're suffering from that, to find sex to be pleasurable. So that can definitely be something we see in clinical practice. What's important, I think, for us is to understand with us professionals, we should create an environment to which, most people feel very uncomfortable discussing sex. So it's important to provide an environment where it's a non-judgmental zone and they're safe and free from reprise to discuss, their challenges. Educate. It is amazing to me, just based off my own personal experience reading A Celebration of Sex, how uneducated we are about sex. And I mean that in the most positive way that I can, not to be, not to be rude or anything, but we are. Just based off of my experience of reading the textbook, I couldn't believe all the different ways that we could achieve intimacy and pleasure. So it's important to educate, to make referrals, to provide resources, and to accommodate. And that's what I mean, to help them move forward, whether that be with medication, with counseling, or referrals or resources. Just understand them, or try to understand them, or provide in a place where you can, help them understand themselves or their situation, educate, and accommodate. Conflict within self is negative. Parental attitudes towards sex are frequently associated with subsequent sexual function difficulties and dissatisfaction. So again, back to adolescence and parenting styles. If parents have negative attitudes towards sex, it's inevitable that that will transfer over to the adolescent, and it will cause conflict within self. It will have sexual function difficulties and dissatisfaction within sexual relationships. It can produce, there could be fear of sex. There could be a self-hatred for one's, the way or the size of their penis. And it really causes vulnerability. Sex is such a raw and emotional experience, and it causes you to be vulnerable to another person. If there's a negative parental attitude, of course our children are going to be fearful of sex. They could have self-hatred for their lack of performance, and they could be extremely vulnerable to another person. Couple sexual satisfaction. Definitely, again, educate, awareness, and resources. I'm not going to go back over it, but there is a lack of knowledge, so we just really have to work to help them move forward with knowledge. And like I said, for resources, I just cannot get over on how much, this textbook opened my eyes to intimacy and religion and all that kind of stuff. So this is, if you have a couple that is struggling with sexual satisfaction, just, make resources available to them. And I just think that, a celebration of sex is just an excellent resource to provide. Because it talks about and I cannot pronounce that word, but you can see it on your screen. So those zones, which are, the zones that trigger, pleasure mode, how he encourages you to explore with your partner and to be accepting and open-minded to sexual fantasies, among a million other things that he discusses. Just cannot get over how great that book is. Sexual minorities are groups whose sexual identity, oh, my apologies, identity, orientation, or practices differ from the majority of the surrounding society. That can be lesbian, gay, transgender persons, and or lesbian, gay, or transgender couples. Overall, this population, they're kind of they're lacking their human rights and lack of legitimacy. What I mean by that is I'm a firm believer that love is love and that everybody should be given the same civil rights. So there's a lack of legitimacy in adoption and marriage, and just, society doesn't view them as an acceptable couple. And they experience societal discrimination. And I know everybody has a right to feel the way that they feel, but overall, the amount of hate crimes and negativity that is geared towards sexual minorities, it's overwhelming. They experience isolation. With such discrimination, hate, lack of legitimacy, they're isolated. They're either isolated to themselves because their family, doesn't approve and refuses to, be with them anymore, to, be involved with them anymore, or, isolation as couples. I know me and my husband, we enjoy socializing, so I couldn't imagine how a same-sex couple would feel without that, type of socialization. And their identity, they struggle with their identity. Who am I? Why am I different? Why does this happen to me? Why doesn't so-and-so accept me? Why do people stare at me and my girlfriend while, we're at dinner? They struggle with who they are. And it's hard for them to accept, I'm not going to say a burden, but some would view it as a burden because of all the negativity that encounters it. And they have suicidal tendencies. With isolation and depression and, identity crisis, there's going to be suicidal tendencies. And it's often reported that this community, sexual minorities in the LGBT community, they are known for self-mutilation, if that makes any sense. meaning cutting, but it doesn't have to just be cutting. It could be pulling your hair or picking at your fingers. It can be a number of different things. And as professionals, we need to be aware of those warning signs. And drug and alcohol abuse is huge in sexual minorities. So we need to be able to identify that and to address that and to make the proper referrals. And low academic performance. Excuse me. With our kids that are in school and they're different from the crowd, there's going to be bullying. And when you're being bullied, it's hard to focus on and excelling in school. So it can be expected that, this community will have low academic performance. There's definite with LGBT families, there's adoption adversities. I mean, I'm sure it's developing and it's changing, but they definitely have to go through extreme circumstances in order to, build a family and to adopt. So that's definitely a challenge that we're expected to see in clinical practice. Marital restrictions. We're all familiar with, I think it was Kentucky, the woman who refused to issue a marriage license to the gay couples. So aside from, that's just one situation, but some states, they don't even allow it. So that's definitely a struggle for this community. And hate crime violence. It's like we're living, 50 years ago, where we can still have such an extreme hate for somebody who's different than us, and this is still taking place, and it's still happening. And intimate partner violence. There's an extreme disconnect with domestic violence in the LGBT community. It's often not reported because it's between a woman and a woman and a man and a man. I know that they're working towards reform, but as far as I understand it, it's difficult to prove domestic violence, so often it goes unreported or untreated. So as professionals, we need to also be aware of those warning signs. And I discussed earlier about HIV and AIDS within the LGBT community. That's huge. It's very prevalent and it's very high. And with that comes multiple struggles. And I hope for anybody who's struggling with HIV and AIDS that they seek counsel, because that's definitely not something that they should go through alone without the proper resources and referrals. The text states that when dealing with sexual minorities in clinical practice, that it needs to be grounded in science. There's a lot of strong beliefs, and we all have our personal beliefs, but in regards to working with somebody who has different beliefs than us, it should always be grounded in science. It's definitely absolutely protected by ethics and standards of conduct. If you have an issue and it's, against your personal religious beliefs, it could be, in the best benefit of you and the client to maybe outsource them to another provider. And Edward Alissi from Clinical Social Work Journal states that training and education regarding the LGBT community issue should not end with graduate studies. Much like anything else, we should always continue our education and continue developing our skills so we can be aware of what's changing in legislation and what this community and all communities are facing and what is specific to the minorities. So, in conclusion, I have talked about how human sexual development impacts various domains within development, to include individual and interpersonal. I reviewed my research studies. I discussed how media and religion impacts human sexual development. I discussed, different types of sexual dysfunctions. And I went into detail about sexual minorities in clinical practice. And just different things that we're going to experience as professionals. And I know that this is pre-recorded, so if anybody does have any questions about any of the information that I've presented, please feel free to shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to answer it for you. Other than that, I've just got my references. So again, any questions, feel free to shoot them. I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation, and I look forward to reading your feedback.